True crime videos are some of the most popular in the internet, and with that, a lot of videos repeat the same cases that have been spoken about over and over. In this new series, True Crime Roadtrip, we're going to be diving into a new country every episode with obscure, lesser-known cases from each place. So, buckle up, and prepare for the journey of a lifetime. Our first stop, Japan. Japan is known for having extremely low crime rates, with 0.2 homicides per 100,000 people being the reported rate in 2020. Despite these low rates, the country is home to some of the most disturbing crimes that will shake you to the core. 19-year-olds Megumi Yoshiki and Narumi Takumi would set off from the comfort of their homes on an adventure that they had been building up in their minds for a while. They were going to visit an abandoned building that used to serve as a hotel, but the most interesting part of this building is that it was reportedly haunted. They had heard about this from the locals, as it was a popular spot that was spoken about around town. The hotel, known as the Sabono Spa Hotel, had run into some issues in the early 1980s, mainly financial ones, and they couldn't afford to run the business anymore. The owner attempted to find a new owner, however, no one was keen to take on the business venture. They were left with no choice but to shut their doors. The building remained though, but it wasn't turned into anything else. Instead, it sat abandoned, quickly becoming home to many people that you would be wise to avoid, the most notable of them being violent biker gangs. Despite the people residing there though, many people had ventured inside and had reported having paranormal experiences in the building, and so the girls were extremely excited to finally have a concrete date set to visit the haunted hotspot. On the day of their journey, they woke up early to ensure that they made it to the building in good time. They wanted to have a full day of exploring the next day, and so far, everything was going to plan. They both told their families that they were heading for Yozu City to visit the abandoned hotel, and with their plans in check, they set off in Yoshiki's car. What happens from that point remains a mystery, with only theories and witness accounts to help us build a timeline. The girls went missing on that spring day in 1996, and 25 years later, 2 skeletons would be discovered belonging to the pair. The discovery of the skeletons ended a long search for the girls, but it also raised a bunch of questions with very little answers. Despite that though, some people think they know what happened, so let's build a rough timeline of events. They set off in the morning of May 5th, 1996, leaving their home in Yoshiki's car, heading towards the adventure that awaited them. The journey was quite long, and so they wanted to keep their families in the loop. At around 9:30 PM that night, the pair took a short break at Kiyomaru Park to prepare for the final distance that they had to travel. Half an hour later, they refueled the car at a nearby gas station before getting back on the road. At 11 PM, one of the girls' friends would receive a message from them reading, "We have arrived at Yozu." After this message, attempts to contact the girls would go unanswered, and they would be reported missing just 2 days after they had left. What followed over the next couple of years would be an insane amount of theories as to what could have possibly happened to the girls. Did they reach their destination? Did they crash their vehicle and perish at the scene? Some people theorized that they may have disappeared on purpose, using the haunted location as a ruse so that their family didn't have any suspicions. On the other hand, some people thought that the violent gangs calling the abandoned building home had taken their lives or were holding them captive. They could have crashed on the way to their destination, possibly swerving off the road with no survivors. No theories were confirmed for a long time, but the police did receive one lead in late 2014 that they thought may be important. The police were tipped off about events that happened in the late night of May 5th to the early hours of May 6th, 1996. 3 men had come forward to report that a black Subaru Vivio had gone crashing into the cold ocean. The men had recognized the photos of Megumi and Narumi when they saw the appeals for information, as they had seen the girls inside of this vehicle, parked close to the edge of a cliff. The men reported that they approached the vehicle, but before they could say anything, the vehicle reversed at a high speed directly off of the cliff and into the sea below. When asked why they didn't come forward sooner with this information, the men claimed that they didn't want to come forward out of fear of being blamed for the fate of the girls. Despite receiving this tip in 2014, the police left it on the back burner and didn't follow through with an investigation until March 2020, when they finally carried out this investigation and headed to the reported location of the crashed vehicle. They found 2 skeletons that they determined belonged to Megumi and Narumi. The identity of the men who came forward with the witness testimonies were never revealed, and the COD for the 2 girls has been put down as accidental causes. The police had one more fact that they revealed to the public though, that fact being that the girls had not visited the abandoned hotel that night. Were these men telling the truth about what had happened, or did they maybe have some part in what happened to the pair? It seems as if the family had no reason to suspect that the girls would be planning to end themselves, so if they did drive off of the cliff themselves, what caused them to make this drastic decision? If I had to give my opinion on the case, I believe that there are 2 possible outcomes. One possibility is that the girls were struggling mentally and had planned this trip as a final farewell, deciding to drive off of the cliff and end their own existence. What makes me think that this is less likely is the fact that they made sure to keep in touch with their loved ones to tell them when they had arrived, when they were taking a break from driving, and so on. If this was their plan all along, then why would they want to update everyone on what was happening if it wasn't going to matter soon? The second possibility is that the men had something to do with what happened to them. Only 2 skeletons were discovered in the wreck, so no one else was in the vehicle when it flew off of the cliff edge. Maybe the men had done something to scare the girls, causing them to have a panic reaction and reverse a car without thinking. They may have not even known that the car was in reverse, so when they felt it start to go back, they freaked out and hit the wrong thing, causing it to speed backwards. This could have freaked the men out, as it may have not been their intention for this to happen. It seems unlikely that if they were involved, that they intended to end the lives of the girls, as why would they come forward with this information when they could clearly get away with the crime? Megumi's father has spoken out about the testimonies and says that he doesn't trust the witnesses at all. He even wanted the investigation to continue, however the police refused and chose to remain with the theory that it was truly accidental. What do you think happened to Megumi and Narumi on that night in 1996? Were they a victim of foul play, or was this really accidental? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this disturbing case. We often hear about cases where children have been neglected by their parents, and this next entry shows how much of an impact neglect can have on someone's life. Born in the north of Japan, Genzo Kurita was the 3rd child in a large family. His father was an ex-fisherman who could no longer work like he used to be able to, leaving his mother responsible for supporting the entire family with her earnings. She had to provide for over 12 people, which was clearly not an easy task, not only from a money standpoint, but also from an affection side of things. Some of the relatives got more attention than others, and Genzo was one of the children who would be overlooked by his hard-working mother. Genzo's childhood wasn't easy, as you can probably guess. He would often wet the bed, and this resulted in the young boy smelling like urine, as his parents were unable to properly help him out with his issues. This resulted in a lot of bullying from his peers in school, eventually resulting in him dropping out entirely in the 3rd grade in hopes to end the constant mental strain that he was experiencing as a result of the torment. After he dropped out, he struggled to fit into society. He was sent to help out on farms by his family, however he couldn't hold a position as the farmers would complain about the constant odour coming off of him and about his constant bedwetting. The only people he seemed to attract were strange individuals, such as one older man who told the young boy that women liked being slapped, punched and strangled during intimate moments in bed. He kept trying to find a job to please his family and earn him some credit, but his inability to control his bladder proved to be his downfall. When he was 19, he joined the Japanese army to fight in the Second World War. After serving just 2 months though, he was discharged due to him wetting the bed. He recovered from his military discharge and decided to try his hand as a coal miner. He had seemingly found his calling in life, as he enjoyed being surrounded by strong men, and the physical labour pushed him to become a force to be reckoned with. With his newfound roughness though, he would fall into a life of petty crime. In the aftermath of World War II, Japan suffered from food shortages among other things, resulting in the quick rise of black markets. Genzo would take advantage of this opportunity and would often take part in illegal transactions, stealing things to sell on to buyers, hoping to make some cash and hopefully a name for himself. He did make a name for himself in the criminal records though, as he was arrested multiple times during his first dip into a life of crime, mainly for petty theft, but in one case, attempted murder. Despite being arrested though, he was always released, and he never seemed to change or show any signs of wanting to. How the police didn't suspect that he was on a downward slope, no one knows, but he quickly became addicted to the other side of the law. He couldn't keep himself away from committing crimes, and soon enough, he had committed multiple sex crimes. He had urges that he couldn't resist, and he was becoming well known in the world of criminals. Just a few years later, in 1948, he had been dating 2 women at the same time after having promised both of them that he would marry them. He had made a name for himself in the black market, and he had finally found his real calling. He had gone from a weak boy to a strong man, and he was about to transform again, this time into a complete monster. Genzo made love with one of his girlfriends. However, after the act was done, she decided to bring up the topic of marriage again. She really wanted to marry Genzo, but he was getting extremely fed up with her asking him about a wedding. Out of nowhere, like something had snapped inside of him, he ended her inquiries by wrapping his hands around her throat and choking the life out of her. Her lifeless body lay in the bed, and Genzo felt a rush. He liked the feeling of taking the life of another person, but he had to decide if he wanted to go down this dark path. Soon enough, one of the victim's friends discovered that he had taken her life and begged him to turn himself in. Knowing that he would almost certainly be sentenced to death, he made the decision to taste blood yet again and ended the life of the friend. He violated her remains before taking both of the victims out to the coast of Numazu to bury them. He knew inside that there was no turning back now. He was officially a killer and a monster. His reign fell silent for years, until 1951, when he would once again be desperate for blood on his hands. Although initially planning a robbery, he spotted a 24-year-old mother and decided to do much worse. He scoured the property, watching her every move, and waited until she was asleep before stepping foot inside. He broke into the house and violated the mother, strangling her like he did his other victims after he had carried out the disgusting act. He performed the act again once he had ended her, and he continued to steal random items from the home. He took some of these household items and buried them in the back garden for unknown reasons. He also left his feces at the scene of the crime. He left the baby belonging to the mother completely unharmed, although it was present throughout all of this, and he left the home. He had gone off the rails, and this was a man that desperately needed to be stopped. He didn't wait long before making his next move, as just a few months later, he stalked a family as he waited for their relative to arrive at a train station. The relative had not shown up, so Genzo approached the family while they were in an extremely vulnerable position. He convinced the mother and her 3 children to accompany him to a cliff area. It is unclear exactly how he managed to convince them to come with him, but it would prove to be the ultimate mistake. He spared no time in grabbing the 2 oldest children and throwing them off of the cliff. He did his usual disgusting acts with the mother before throwing her and the final child off of the cliff as well. The fall had not ended their lives, however, and sadly, Genzo was well aware of that. He carefully climbed down the cliff and picked up a large rock, which he then used to finish each of the family members off. The eldest daughter of the family was the only surviving member, as she managed to act quickly and hide from Genzo before he made his way down. She worked closely with the police to hopefully apprehend the man who had mercilessly executed her family, but they wouldn't be able to capture him before he would strike again. A few months later, he was on the prowl again, searching for a home to break into, looking for items to sell on the black market or for another unsuspecting victim. He found a home and he made his way inside. Inside was a 63-year-old woman and her 24-year-old niece. They were the only people in the house, and Genzo had managed to take them by surprise. He tied them both up before grabbing a knife from the kitchen. He attacked the older woman with the knife before discarding the weapon and using his hands to end the niece. He left the home without taking any of their belongings, leaving the victims for law enforcement to find. At this point, his face had been plastered everywhere, and deep down, he knew that his time was coming to an end. Before he could strike again, police analysed the fingerprints on the knife that he had used to slay the older woman, and they used this to track him down and finally put him behind bars. He was taken in for intense questioning, and to investigators' surprise, he denied any involvement in any of the crimes. His facade wouldn't last long though, as he would begin spilling all of the disgusting details of each of his crimes to anyone who would listen. The same year he was arrested, he would be sentenced for the final 2 slayings that he had committed. He had given more than enough information for the prosecutors to get a conviction, and they decided to give him the death penalty, a fate that he knew was coming. The following year, he was given another death penalty for the other crimes that he had committed, becoming the first person in Japanese history to receive 2 sentences of death. Surprisingly, he tried to appeal the sentence, but this was quickly withdrawn as he realized that there was absolutely no hope for him. He was taken to prison, and while he waited to be executed, he became weak once again and began wetting the bed. The disturbing life and reputation that he had built for himself was collapsing before his eyes. In the final months leading up to his execution, he would scream, saying that he didn't want to perish, and begged for mercy. His pleas were thankfully ignored, and he was executed on October 14th, 1959, at the age of 32. Finally putting an end to his reign of terror. Home security is extremely important, and this next case shows exactly what can happen if you live in a completely unprotected apartment. Let me show you a photo. What do you notice here? Your eye may be attracted to the fence, maybe the door, or the windows. But no matter what you're drawn to, you'll take note of the fact that anyone could go up to this property if they were inclined to. Most apartments nowadays are equipped with security doors that a resident has to buzz you in through, but these measures used to be less common, especially in Japan. A lot of apartment buildings used to be as simple as this, but the apartment in this specific photo went unoccupied for over 40 years after a horrific incident occurred inside. Living inside of the apartment in the late 1980s were 3 groups of people. On the first floor, there were 2 families living in the 2 apartments. Upstairs, there was only 1 couple living there, as the other apartment was vacant at the time this incident occurred. The couple were living a very happy life after being 4 years into their marriage. They were extremely happy with each other, and they were eagerly awaiting the birth of the child that the wife, Mariko, was pregnant with. The husband, Maria Yasso, was working hard to provide for his wife and the 1-year-old child that they already had. Mariko had quit her job to focus on the pregnancy and taking care of her child. She had found herself working for a sales business remotely, and with her husband picking up necessities on his way home from work, she didn't have to leave the house often, but that was alright, as she felt safe in the comfort of her own home. She often had visitors, or would head over the road to other apartments, as she had made friends with the other housewives in the area, though the fact she didn't go out often made people take notice of what she was wearing or where she was going when she would be spotted leaving the property. It was the early morning of March 18th, when Yasuo would head off to work for the day. Mariko was left home alone, but not for long, as she was scheduled for a check at the hospital that morning to see how her pregnancy was coming along. Deep down, they were both nervous for what the doctor would say, but they hoped that everything would be alright and that the check would go smoothly. She headed to the hospital, and the check was a success. Everything was alright, and the doctor had no worries to speak of. She rushed to tell her husband the news on their daily lunchtime phone call, but this conversation was brief as Yasuo had to quickly get back to work. Mariko had told him all she needed to though, so she headed home to rest for the remainder of the day, and to prepare herself for the upcoming birth of her baby, which was rapidly approaching. Later that day, Yasuo finished his shift and would once again call Mariko to tell her that he was on his way home. The phone rang, but it went to voicemail. This was very unlike her, as she usually picked up almost immediately. They had been keeping up with these daily phone calls for months, and so he started to panic when she didn't pick up after he tried many more times. He sped down the road, making his way to the house to check on his wife. He climbed the stairs, and he could hear the faint cry of a baby. This was unusual, as he did not recognize it as the cries of his child. He stepped closer to the front door of his apartment and reached for the doorknob. Expecting it to be locked like it usually was when his wife was home alone at this time, he decided to try and turn it. To his horror, the doorknob turned and the door swung open, revealing a dark apartment with no one desperate to greet him. The cries had just gotten louder as he stepped foot into the first hallway. Without going too far inside, he spotted his wife laying on the floor in the darkness, with the fetus lying at her feet. In a panic, he rushed into the kitchen, desperately searching for a phone to call the emergency services, but, in his state, he couldn't find it. He rushed out of the house and begged the neighbours to let him use their phone, saying that his wife had just given birth and that the paramedics needed to come there now. The ambulance rushed to the scene to take care of his wife. He pointed the paramedics towards his apartment, and when they stepped inside, they heard damp sounds from under their feet with every step they took. They reached for the light switch, ready for whatever it may reveal. They flipped it, and in front of them, lying in a pool of blood, was the lifeless body of Yasuo's wife, with electrical cables tied tightly around her neck. Close to her was the fetus, which had been cut out of her stomach and was still attached via an umbilical cord. Her abdomen had been cut open, and inside of her, her slayer had placed a telephone, the cord for said telephone, and a Mickey Mouse key holder inside of her where the fetus had previously been. Realizing they were dealing with a slaying, the paramedics immediately called the police to the scene. They shut off the apartment, and the forensic team began their investigation. A police officer described the room as one of the most disturbing scenes that he had ever seen while on the job, and that was terrifyingly true. The victim's blue maternity dress was drenched in blood, much like the room itself. The baby, who had been forcefully removed, was found crying in a pool of his mother's blood, with multiple stab wounds on his left leg, his thigh, and his crotch. The victim's abdomen had been cut open by 25 centimeters, and the baby had been removed by her slayer from there. There were no signs of a struggle inside of the apartment, and there were indications that she had been strangled until she perished prior to the removal of the baby. The cut was quite clean apart from being done in the wrong direction, leading investigators to believe that this was done by someone who knew their stuff and was desperately trying to learn on real test subjects. Her hands had also been tied behind her back. No evidence was found at the scene apart from a shoe print that measured 38 centimeters in size, the equivalent to shoe size 6 in the UK and 7 in the US. The mother and the baby were taken to hospital, and there the mother was pronounced dead, although she probably perished at the scene. Miraculously though, the baby managed to survive. Although he had been stabbed, most likely as a result of the stomach being cut open, he made a full recovery and is reported to be living a good life. There are two prominent theories relating to this case, and we're going to dive into both of them. The first theory is that her life was ended by someone close to her who knew her and her husband's routine, and who better to be suspect number one than someone who knew it like the back of his hand, the husband himself. During interviews related to the slaying of his wife, he made comments that some saw as casual and calm, which he didn't believe would be the case if he was genuinely upset about what had happened to his wife. Some argued that he may have just been in a state of shock or putting on a brave face for the press. However, this has led some others to believe that he was secretly behind it all. Putting more weight behind the theory that he committed the crime was the fact that it was discovered that he entered the home upon arriving back from work, and instead of immediately searching for his wife after realizing that something was strange, he instead decided to go to their bedroom and change out of his work suit. Only after changing his clothes would he search for his wife, who very well could have been in danger the moment he entered the apartment as far as he was aware. In addition to this, Some people reported that they often heard the couple arguing and that it seemed as if there was a strain on their marriage. According to reports, the victim also displayed multiple symptoms of depression. The victim's friends have said that everything seemed alright though, and that they both seemed to be happier than ever. Although some people felt these facts were enough to pin the crime on him, two things were keeping him out of the spotlight of investigators. He had a solid alibi, as he was still working at the estimated time that the victim perished. He was seen by co-workers at this time, and so he was all but ruled out as a possible suspect. In addition to this, a strange man was reported in the area on the day that this crime occurred, leading police to focus all of their resources on finding out as much information as they could about the mystery man. The mysterious person was first spotted in the neighborhood at around 2:30 p.m. He was seen sitting in the driver's seat of a parked red car with the engine on. He was spotted again at about 10 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, the time that investigators believe the victim was slain, and was described as being of a medium build. However, no one could describe his face. He sprinted down the staircase that led to the second floor of the apartment before fleeing the neighborhood. Just 10 minutes later, a neighbor would have a run-in with a different individual who was just as strange as the one before. One of the first-floor neighbors of the same apartment block the victim lived in heard their doorknob rattling. They slowly approached the door, but it would suddenly stop when they were about to look outside. There was then a knock at the door, and the first-floor neighbor opened it up to see a man with a round face, dressed in a suit and holding a briefcase, who was estimated to be about 30 years old. Without a word being said, the man asked if the neighbor knew where the home of a Mr. Nakamura was. Confused, the neighbor replied that they didn't, as no one in the neighborhood had that surname. As quickly as he had come, the mysterious man turned around and left the neighborhood, never being spotted again that day. Adding to the theory that an outside person committed this crime was that the victim had a friend over that day who she expressed concern to about a strange man entering the apartment directly next door to them often, despite it being completely desolate. Maybe someone overheard the conversation and decided to silence her. Or maybe this was premeditated, and she knew deep down that something was up with the man next door. The friend had left her apartment, and the victim had forgotten to lock the door, making it a prime opportunity for someone to enter the home undetected. The second man to visit a neighbor that day may have been a criminal looking for another victim. Remember that before he rang the bell, it seems as though he attempted to open the door, as the doorknob was seen and heard being messed with. Maybe the same man or a group of men had tried this to the victim upstairs, as it would explain why there were no signs of a struggle if they really had entered the apartment with a completely unaware victim. The final theory is that it was someone who was known to the victim but not extremely close to them. The victim was part of a multi-level marketing scheme that involved selling deodorant products. The friend that visited her on the day that she perished was actually a customer of hers who was coming over to pick up some of the products that she had been promoting. Some believe that she may have unknowingly annoyed someone in the past in relation to her role, leading them to hold a grudge against her and plan out the revenge. Once again, it seems as if this would have been a premeditated crime in which they got lucky with the door being unlocked. I'd say that the most likely theory is that the people in the area had something to do with what happened. It seems incredibly unlikely that these people would be spotted in the area acting extremely strange, and that one of them would even be caught messing around with a doorknob, considering we know that the victim's one was accidentally left unlocked. Also consider the possibility that the man she had seen going into the empty apartment next door was one of the men spotted that day. Considering no one else reported ever seeing him enter, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that he was never seen by anyone else but the victim, and thus no one would have ever seen his face to possibly connect the dots that the men were related in some way. Ultimately, I do believe that this crime was premeditated in some way, and that the criminal just got lucky with the door being unlocked. Maybe someone had spotted her at the hospital that day and had decided to follow her home. There are so many possibilities that we can never really know for sure, considering how little evidence was actually found. This is a case that stands as a disturbing reminder of what humans are capable of. The husband moved to Hawaii shortly after this occurred, and it is unknown if the child knows exactly how he was born. The name of the child has been kept anonymous, however, some sources have reported that the boy is living a happy life. It is reported that 96 serial killers have been active in Japan. Compared to the United States number of over 3,000, it may seem quite low, but it is still a lot when you consider the amount of lives that have been taken by all of them combined. One of these serial killers is known as the Wednesday Strangler. The case begins back in 1975, when a 12-year-old girl referred only to as Y was home alone. Her mother was a busy woman, spending her nights working at the bar that she ran, but she didn't like to leave the young girl unprotected at home, and so she would usually take her along to the bar, where she could study while her mother kept a watchful eye over her. On this night, her mother had allowed her to stay home so she could get her homework done in peace, and she trusted her enough to take care of herself and the house. The mother had shut the bar down for the night and headed back to her home. She entered and noticed that she had not been greeted by her daughter. The television was still on, which was strange, but she tried to think rationally. Although initially assuming that she had just gone to bed, after a search of the house, panic set in when her daughter was nowhere to be found, with the only thing left of her being the shoes that she was wearing that day. She rushed to get in touch with the police and they made their way to the scene. No evidence was found in or around the property, but questioning individuals in the area did turn up some information. Someone had spotted the young girl with a man that they did not recognize near a telephone booth close to her home. Where she or the man went next is unknown, but it can be assumed that she was taken by this man before being slain at another location. How he managed to convince her to leave the house is unknown, but it doesn't seem unlikely that he would have been able to, considering her young age. Other reports claim that she had been forced into a vehicle directly outside of her house, which seems more likely than the pair travelling on foot. Almost 5 years later, a disturbing discovery would be made when someone would find the lifeless body of a young girl in an elementary school's septic tank. When results came back, they revealed that the body was that of Y. After a long wait, the victim had finally been found, but sadly, the state it was in due to how long it took to find it made it almost impossible to determine a COD. With the impossible task of figuring out how she perished, it was even less likely that the police were going to be able to pin the crime on anyone. Just a few months earlier from when she was found though, a 20-year-old woman had gone missing under the same circumstances as the first victim. Police immediately saw this connection and followed it in the hopes of finding something at the end of the trail. The woman, referred to as H, was home alone on the 12th of April 1980, and she would mysteriously disappear. It was her birthday the day prior to her disappearance, and she had made some concerning comments to her friends regarding her mental state. She had tried to end her own existence in the past, but she had failed. She told her friends that once she turned 20, she was going to try and end herself once again. This obviously raised some concerns among the friend group, and they started to worry even more when she went missing, fearing that she had gone through with what she seemed to have planned. Information about her disappearance was scarce for days, until her father received a letter to his home address. The letter stated that his daughter will not be returning home, and that the author of the letter hopes that he suffers as well. The father was asked by many outlets to go on television shows to discuss his daughter's disappearance to hopefully bring her back home, but after the letter came through, he also received multiple threatening phone calls telling him not to go on any television shows regarding his daughter's disappearance and not to show any photographs of the missing girl. The fact the caller asked him not to show any photographs led some people to believe that it was actually H herself calling him, and that she didn't want any photographs to be made public out of fears that she would be spotted and reported if she was then seen on the street. A lot of people believe she disappeared out of her own free will, and that the threatening communications were simply to knock the father and the authorities off of her trail. The case died down as people accepted this as a conclusion, until shortly after Y was found, when a second body would be discovered. The body belonged to H, and some reports state that she had been put in the same septic tank that Y had been in. Similar to Y, H's body was too badly decomposed for a COD to be determined. Due to the links between the two cases, investigators theorized that they may have been connected. Despite having no COD or clear motive, they found it incredibly unlikely that two different people would choose to place their victims in the same location, especially inside of a septic tank. They wanted someone to go down for this before they could strike again, but as the clock ticked on, it seemed incredibly unlikely due to the lack of evidence surrounding both cases. It wouldn't take long for another victim to go missing, as in October of that year, a 27-year-old woman referred to as C would leave work for the final time. She hadn't been to work 4 days prior to this incident as she was caring for her mother, who was unwell at the time. When she did return, she had a good shift, and when she clocked out, she headed to the car park of the building. Here, she was spotted by a colleague of hers speaking to a man who he did not recognise. The colleague stated that the man was in his 30s and he was sitting inside of a vehicle. Thinking this was her friend or someone picking her up, he headed to his car and made his way to his own destination. Little did he know that this would be the last time anyone would see the victim alive, as she would go missing that same night. Worry didn't immediately set in when she didn't show up for work that day, but as days turned into a week, everyone feared that something bad may have happened. No evidence was found in the car park that pointed towards a crime having been committed, and searches turned up nothing of the missing woman. 2 weeks after she had last been seen though, her body was stumbled upon in an empty parking lot. There were no signs that she had been violated in any way prior or after she had been slain. But the COD was able to be determined this time around. She had been strangled to death with a power cord. For reasons that they have not publicly stated, the authorities believed that this case may have been connected to the slayings of H and Y, and the police feared that they may now have a serial killer on their hands. Their fears were confirmed when another abduction would be attempted on the 17th of February 1982. 2 young students had been making their way home from school when a man unknown to them grabbed them and attempted to wrestle them into his vehicle. Knowing that they lacked the strength to fight him off, they decided to scream as loud as they possibly could in order to attract attention and hopefully scare the man off. Thankfully, it actually worked, and the man let go of the children and sped off in his vehicle. The students knew that they had both been extremely lucky, and authorities knew that they may have just narrowly avoided being the next 2 victims of their number 1 target. On the same day and around the same time of the attempted abduction, an 11-year-old girl, referred to as A, was walking home from school when the same man was seen speaking to her. At some point during their interaction, when he saw that no one was around, it is thought that he grabbed the young girl and took her in his white car. The vehicle and the man were never seen again. Just a short while later, the body of the girl was discovered on a nearby farm. She was easy to identify as the crime was only recent, and she was still wearing the backpack that she had taken to school. Her COD was strangulation, and so her case was again tied to the previous 3, with the attempted abductions also being linked due to the same car being spotted at both crime scenes. Now we move on to the next victim of this deranged monster. A 48-year-old woman referred to as C. She had left work on the 8th of July 1987, and she would be in a rush as she was set to meet her mother and son for dinner. When she arrived, they sat down at the table and dug into the delicious meal that had been prepared for them. Interrupting their meal, C's phone would begin to ring. With a strange look on her face, she answered the phone call, and by the end of it, she was visibly upset. Something that both her mother and son took note of. Of course, her mother asked who was on the phone. She didn't say exactly, but just replied that she had to go and give her friend a ride somewhere. Strangely though, she told her son something different. She told him that she had to leave to go for a dinner with a friend. They let her go though, and she drove off. That would be the last time they would see her. A short while after she disappeared, her vehicle was located in the car park of a bowling alley. She wasn't inside it though, and no evidence pointed towards her whereabouts. A couple of years later, in 1989, her body would finally be discovered at the bottom of a cliff. Her COD was determined to be strangulation once again, and disturbingly, hers wasn't the only body that had been dumped there. Accompanying her were 3 other lifeless bodies, each having been strangled. And these are the final 2 victims that the police believe the Wednesday Strangler took the lives of. The first of these victims is referred to as N, and she was a 50-year-old woman who left her house to make the 10-minute walk for a volleyball session on the 7th of December 1988. She usually didn't make the walk alone, as she would be accompanied by a friend, but on this day, the friend had chosen not to attend as she had other things going on, and so, Anne had no choice but to make the walk alone. She had no problem with this though, as she had never run into any problems in her area, and it wasn't exactly a long walk. She was spotted speaking to a woman who was sitting in a car with the engine on. No one cared to get close enough for a good look at the woman, as this seemed like a person just conversing with a friend. But these passerbys would quickly become witnesses when she went missing a short while later. They gave their witness reports to the authorities. However, they were not able and still have never been able to identify the woman in the car. They do suspect that she was the one who took N though, and she may have been working with the man known as the Wednesday Strangler. Just 1 week after she went missing, her husband received a disturbing phone call. The police managed to record the call due to his phone line being placed under constant monitoring in the case of something like this happening. The husband picked up the phone and said hello, stating his name. The caller immediately hits back, stating that his wife was found. Clearly confused, the husband questions what he is talking about, and the man just responds saying that it is nice that she was found. He asks where she was found, and the caller says that she was found in Yakigome. Finally, the husband asks who it is on the other side of the line, to which the caller just responds, saying that it is a person that he knows. The line would then go dead, leaving him with far more questions than he had before. Admittedly, this could very well be a prank call, but it would raise the question of how a simple prank artist would get the number of a private individual who seemed to stay low-key. Nothing ever came from investigations into the call, and the caller was never identified. And now the second victim of the final two, a 37-year-old woman referred to as S. S had been on a night out with friends, but she felt that it was time to call it a night and decided to head home. Enjoying the cold breeze of the night, she decided to walk the short distance rather than taking a taxi. She was not spotted after leaving the company of her friend, and little is known about the circumstances surrounding her disappearance or her life in general. All we know is that she went missing that night, and that she was identified as one of the bodies at the bottom of the cliff. All of these slayings had been carried out in a 12-mile radius, which was what initially made the police connect them all apart from the CODs. The first two and the final three victims are clearly connected to one another. However, some people debate if the third and fourth were done by the same person or not. It didn't matter if they really were connected or not, at least not to law enforcement, as they were determined that someone was going to pay for these crimes either way. And in November of 1989, they thought they had struck the jackpot. They arrested a man on unrelated charges, but he had confessed to slaying the final three victims. He was immediately sent to prison awaiting trial, and he was actually charged for the crimes in 2002. However, before he was charged, he had taken back his confession, claiming that he had been coerced into confessing and that he had nothing to do with the fate of the women. Despite this though, prosecutors continued to push for the harshest possible sentence, a sentence of death. This was completely unsuccessful though, and he was acquitted of all charges in early 2007, with the court officially concluding that there was not enough evidence for a conviction, and that coercion by the officers who had initially interviewed him tainted the case. He was taken to trial again though, as the police were convinced that he was their man. They attempted to use DNA evidence to highlight a connection between the man and the victims. However, it was inconclusive, and he was once again cleared of all charges put against him. The police finally gave up the relentless pursuit of the man, admitting that they had interrogated the suspect to an extreme degree, and that the investigation carried out was poor at best. This man was the last suspect to ever be accused of the crimes. Some fail to see a link between all the victims apart from the obvious ones, and the fact that all but one were slain on a Wednesday. I want to give my thoughts on this case in particular. The police have admitted that the detective work was bad on these cases, so maybe the link between the seven is the worst fact that they've come up with. The first two are clearly connected due to them being found in the same location, and the same applies for the final three. The third and the fourth are believed to be connected due to the proximity the bodies were found to each other. However, apart from the COD, that seems to be the only connection. A lot of these women were of different ages, so there is no clear connection apart from them all being female. It is reported that a sentence from the letter H's father received has not been made public due to it containing private information. This has led some people to believe that she was slain by someone who knew her and her family. her father in particular, and that it was some sort of revenge, for something that they had done in the past. This makes a lot of sense to me, and it makes you wonder whether the first victim was also a revenge or opportunistic killing. There were rumors circulating on the internet that theorized the man who took Y's life had been a regular at the bar her mother worked at. Maybe he spotted the young girl doing her work at the bar and took an interest, and then he noticed that she wasn't there one day, and he took his chance to strike. This is just my theory though, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments below. The Wednesday Strangler remains unidentified, and each case remains unsolved. It is likely that it will remain that way, as no new evidence or suspects have come to light since the acquittal of the man in 2007. The area that this all took place in has a population of just over 800,000, so it's terrifying to think that those who live there may have been interacting with a deranged monster. Before we move on to the final stretch, I would like to give a quick shout out to my patrons Neil, Morrigan, Alex Rod, K4 Silver, Entreprenaut, Collectiki, and Chelsea Winezo. Just to let you know, all of my videos are also available on Spotify if you wish to download them or listen to them with or without video. Now, without further hesitation, on to the final case. 2-year-old Mikiko Shushiyama loved to play outside near her home, and her parents always made sure to keep an eye on her to make sure that the daughter they loved dearly was safe. Looking away for a minute though proved to be devastating, as she had disappeared from where she had been playing. Panic set in for the parents, who were worried sick, and they screamed out for their daughter, hoping that she could hear them. They scoured the area for any sign of their daughter, and in a drainage ditch close to the family's home, they finally spotted her. They rushed over to her and checked if she was alive. Thankfully, she was only unconscious, and she was rushed to the hospital where a full examination of the girl would take place. She survived without any injuries, something that the doctors saw as extremely lucky, and the incident was ruled as an accident. The parents knew that they had to be even more strict now over their daughter's safety, and so they kept her at arm's length for the entire month following the event. After the month had passed though, they felt that they trusted her again not to make a mistake and fall. They let her play outside again. However, they made sure to watch her even closer. Once again, they looked away for a mere minute, and their daughter was gone. What followed was the same process of screaming her name in the hopes she would turn up, and searching the area for the missing girl. Strangely, they found her in the exact same drainage ditch, unconscious again. They rushed her to the hospital once again, waiting for news of her condition, and the wait was a painfully long one. As the clock ticked on, they feared more and more for what was going to happen to their daughter, and the doctors came out with bad news around 9 hours after she had brought in. Mikiko had passed, and this seemed to be nothing more than a tragic accident. That wasn't the case though. It is now believed that what happened to the young girl was no accident. Let's go back to the first time she had been brought to the hospital. Police had arrived to check things out, as a child had been harmed, and this was simply the process. The doctors had checked over the girl and had noticed that she had some clear bruises on her neck. This information was handed over to the police, and they made a note of it, but theorized that it may have just been the ditch she had fallen into having caused them. When she passed though, doctors called police to the scene and gave them information of new bruises that had appeared for a second time. This time, they took a closer look at the girl, and they were similar to bruises that one would receive if they had been strangled. This was enough for the police to feel the need to launch a full criminal investigation into her COD, and some disturbing evidence would turn up when they began their search for answers. In the days after she had passed, the first clues came up when Mikiko's grandfather received a series of strange phone calls for days on end. He told the police about these, but noted he couldn't make out what was being said, but that the caller was definitely a woman. On one call, he heard the words, "Excuse me," before the caller hung up. In other calls, there was just silence and nothing more. The theory that I personally believe is also the theory that was thought up by investigators working the case. They believe that her slayer was stalking her, and whenever she was let out to play, he would sneakily watch behind her, waiting for the right moment to pounce. They believe he took this moment when the parents looked away and grabbed the girl, strangling her both times, attempting to end her existence each time before dumping the victim in the ditch. This would explain how he was able to make his escape quickly without being discovered. He would have had to be quick to escape though, as not a single report came out of the neighbourhood of any strange individuals being spotted at any point around the time of the incident. In addition to this, there were no defence wounds found on the girl, so she was either taken by surprise or perished a different way. This case is extremely saddening, as we will likely never know who or what actually took the life of the young girl. Let this serve as a reminder to always keep your loved ones close. If you want to hear more about disturbing cases and mysteries, then click this playlist on the screen to fall down the rabbit hole.